This city surrounded by water.
Mindestens 100 Tote und über 200 Verletzte.
This will not be a campaign of half measures.
A
lot of things happen every day, and sometimes it may feel like there is some sort of strange uniformity to it. That for every single day, just the right amount of things happen to fill a 15-minute evening news show or the front page of a news website. But of course, that's not really the case. The threshold of what's considered newsworthy is constantly changing, and events that would make headlines on one day may be completely ignored on another. Let's look at an example. In the early 1960s, when NASA developed the Relay satellite program to transmit television signals across the Pacific, their first broadcast was envisioned as a monumental occasion, making nationwide headlines celebrating technological progress. But as it just so happened, famous author C.S. Lewis died on the very same day of that first broadcast, 22nd November 1963. Of course, Lewis didn't do that on purpose, and neither did he plan to die on the same day his contemporary and fellow author Aldous Huxley would succumb to cancer. Truly a devastating day, as was the 23rd, when a fire would break out in the Golden Age nursing home near Fitchville, Ohio, claiming the lives of 63 residents. Now, all of these events could have made US headlines around that time, but actually, not a single one did. For on November 22nd, 1963, then President of the United States John F. Kennedy was assassinated while riding the presidential motorcade through Dallas, Texas.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Anything else to happen on that day or the days after that was completely overshadowed by this single event. Before we dive in deeper and talk about other examples, let's quickly examine the word overshadow, because there are at least two different flavors to its meaning. When the reporting of the Kennedy assassination took over the media for weeks, other news stories were underreported and did not get the attention they would have otherwise gotten. A slightly different meaning of the word, however, often involves tragedies at sporting events. For example, during the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich, the US basketball team lost to the Soviet team in one of the most controversial finals in the history of the Olympics. This incident was widely reported. It made headlines and sparked a long discussion. But even had the Americans won, there would have been little reason to celebrate, as all people had in the back of their minds was the Munich massacre, during which 11 Israeli athletes were killed by Palestinian terrorists. This video is going to largely focus on the first meaning of the word, although, as we are going to see in a moment, the two meanings are often somewhat intertwined. When Austrian Formula 1 driver Roland Ratzenberger fatally crashed during the qualifying of the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, it was reported on German Tagesschau Evening News almost 10 minutes in, after other supremely important news items such as the Peace Prize of the German book trade. It was the first item in the sports block and consisted of the announcer briefly describing the incident in about 30 seconds, to the backdrop of a photo of Ratzenberger.
Der österreichische Formel-1-Pilot Roland Ratzenberger starb heute beim Abschlusstraining zum großen Automobilpreis von San Marino in Imola.
But when on the next day Ayrton Senna fatally crashed during the actual race, it became the leading news story and took about 5 times the runtime. Experts were interviewed, footage was shown, and for the next few days, updates were given on the background of how and why the crash happened. Ratzenberger was rarely ever mentioned again, and when he was, only as the driver who died the day before Senna. When I phrase it like that, it seems unjust, because why would the death of one race driver be more important than the other? Well, if we take a look past the fact that one driver was more famous than the other, we find out that Ratzenberger was an accomplished race driver in general, but was still a beginner in the Formula 1, with only 2 races completed, at the unusually high age of 33. As it had been 12 years since the last fatality at a Grand Prix, analysts and drivers tried to somewhat rationalize the event. However, when Senna crashed the next day, everyone realized that not even a 3-time world champion was safe, and that every race could be fatal. Michael Schumacher admitted that it was after Senna's crash that he became fully aware of his own mortality. While both cases were, without a doubt, tragic and left the deceased driver's fans, friends and relatives in bitter pain, it was Senna's death that carried wider consequences. Which is why you could argue it made headlines that day. But then again, Senna's funeral was attended by every active F1 driver of that day, whereas Ratzenberger's only saw the presence of 5. Leaves kind of a bitter taste if you think about it. This brings us to what researchers and journalists refer to as the hierarchy of death. When it comes to reporting, the perceived importance of a famous Steve Jobs is infinitely higher than that of a much less famous Dennis Ritchie, who most people probably haven't even heard of. But more importantly, we as humans usually care about people of our own ethnicity, cultural circle or geographic area. And a particularly daunting example of this happened on the 12th of November 2015, when 2 suicide bombers killed a total of 43 people in Beirut. This terrible incident was only seen briefly on the CNN front page the day it happened, and Tagesschau reported it only halfway into their daily evening news broadcast. In the late hours of the next day, however, CNN's front page looked like this, and the day after that, Tagesschau Evening News reported one thing and one thing only: the Paris attacks, which ultimately left 130 people dead. Despite the obvious similarities between the attacks, one was the news focus for days, while the other one was barely reported at all and then quickly forgotten. Author and journalist Roy Greenslade wrote on this: "Foreign deaths always rank below domestic deaths. Similarly, on the basis that all news is local, deaths at home provide human interest stories that people want to know about, while the deaths of foreigners are merely statistics." But actually, in this case, there is even more to it. On the day after the Paris attacks, a train derailed in Egversheim, France, killing 11 and injuring 42. Not only was this event barely reported, but when it was mentioned, all journalists could think of was whether this was part of the terrorist attacks of the previous night. And when it became clear that this was not the case, the event was quickly forgotten, despite it being the first fatal derailment in the history of the TGV, a headline-worthy event on basically any other day of the year. What it all comes down to is, unfortunately, just the obvious. What do people want to see, and what news do they care about? And while the 1994 NBA Finals were very much something that glued viewers in front of their television sets, the high-speed chase of suspected murderer and former football player O.J. Simpson was just a tiny bit more sensational, more of a once-in-a-lifetime event, and therefore warranted an interruption of scheduled programming. But let's fast forward a bit, because in recent years, news have become a lot more democratic and decentralized. Especially younger people no longer watch linear broadcast television or the 8 p.m. evening news, but instead learn what goes on in the world via social media. Whether this will help us in dealing with any particular bias remains to be seen, because even if an algorithm decides what type of news you see, it is still heavily pressured by what people want to see. Just like in the past, the work of a modern journalist is fundamentally a fight for your attention, which has just been opened up to a lot more contestants. Hey there, thanks for sticking around and watching my 9th video all the way to the end. I really hope you found it interesting. Once again, it took of course way longer than I anticipated, because I always seem to underestimate how long it takes from a finished script to an actually finished video. Oh yeah, and one more thing I wanted to mention about the topic of this video. Despite what some other top 10 lists may try and tell you, the first episode of Doctor Who was actually not overshadowed by the Kennedy assassination. Without this event, it would not have been a spectacle of unequal proportions. It would have been just another random TV show, and it's only famous to us because of its legacy. But hey, who knows what's going to overshadow the release of this video.